I mean, doesn't that come out of the state budget? I mean, if they have to fund these programs, if these are committed, you know, contracts, so to speak, how could these not be part of the budget?
Well, what the governor did try and do, to his credit, 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, is he did try and start taking a bigger bite at it, rather than passing it from year to year. And that's now gone away this year because we ran out of money. So a big bite went away, and that debt service goes away. There's a debt service portion to your budget, and part of it is the $66 billion unfunded. And it's pensions. It's pensions for teachers and state workers and anybody else who participates in the state part of the pension law. It's pensions and healthcare. Pension and healthcare. It's mostly pensions. So,
I mean, eventually that sounds like a bankrupt the system.
yes.
So, I mean, do they have to change pension, you know, the pension programs for workers? I mean, that's, I've been in business, I don't get a pension.
Yep.
I mean, if you look at any non-public employee, you know, there's no such thing as a pension in business anymore.
The way the most common sense and obvious approach to solve the problem is to go to defined contribution plan, 401k.
Yeah.
You kick in half, we kick in half, as opposed to we'll pay for it all and guarantee a rate of return. Well, when the politics are as they are up there, and they have been for a long time, the state employee unions kind of get what they want. Not always, not because they're evil people, but this is what they believe. I don't believe what they believe, but that's what's happening. So you get 4-year no layoff contracts. You get $250 million raise this year. You get, you know, longevity payments, which are now finally actually going to start getting phased out. You get sweetheart pension deals that you have to fund because you made the promise. Once you make the promise, it's on the books. You pretty much have to fund it unless you go bankrupt. I don't think, I know there's lawyers in this room, I don't think a state can legally go bankrupt. It was always a question whether a city could go bankrupt, which apparently I know they can. There's a couple have done it. I don't think a state can. I don't think, there's no chapter for that, is there?
Well, that was going to be one of my questions. I mean, let's say everybody keeps getting what they want, and you don't have the votes or to curb anything. Since this is kind of doom and gloom here, especially this entire package, what is the worst case scenario? I mean, how many years away are we from, you know?
How many years away?
$66 billion. I mean, you know.
I think on our current course, I've seen some numbers, I've seen some projections, and I tend to be. It's funny, even in this environment, I tend to be a bit of an optimist. That's why I keep trying to say these aren't evil people that I disagree with, but they're not. They're good people, and they think this is the right way to go. I've heard numbers as few as a dozen years that we'll just not be able to do this anymore. Our bond rating will start crashing sooner than that, and then we won't be able to afford to borrow money. Every dollar that we send into the state is going to be paid out to debt service, including some of the unfunded stuff, and then basically your services go down, your taxes go up, and your government does nothing. That's the only reason that, I mean, the good news with a bad economy is the interest rates, and nothing is, everything's been down 2%, so inflation hasn't gone out of control. You can borrow money for cheap. We've actually been able to restructure some debt at the state level and kind of extend the pain a little bit, or actually buy down some old bad debt. Or those options are just about done. Because even whether the economy is improving or not, I don't think these bond rates and the interest rates are going to stay where they are now. I think they're going to start clicking up a little bit. And every little tiny click is a direct hit on your bottom line, whether you know it or not. And then forget about your bottom line, it's our kids' bottom line. I keep trying to tell my sons, the 17-year-old meathead high school student, that you're already $28,000 in debt. How's that possible, Dad? It's a part of the conversation I had. But it's true, Forget about the 8-year-old. Sorry.
Is the entire pension fund and benefits for the retirees, is that completely unfunded? Is that $66 billion? $66 billion amount?
Parts are funded, and it's different depending on the fund. Like I think the teachers' fund is 35% funded this time around. It kind of varies.
So they do keep some.
Yeah. They try and keep cash in the system, otherwise people's checks bounce.
Right.
But it's not unusual to have an unfunded pension liability going forward. That's not.
There's different standards applied to private businesses.
Oh, of course.
For the federal government mandates you have to have a certain amount funded. That same standard is not applied to the state. So our legislators have been, in fact, raiding the pension fund to pay for this program.
Or taking money that could or should have gone to the pension fund and using it for other purposes. That's right.
These numbers are underfunded now.
What slide do you want? The 66 billion. That's right.
That's the underfunded amount. That's not the aggregate exposure of our obligations. That's just the underfunded amount of our obligations, I believe.
Yes, I believe that's right.
Compared to Illinois, California, and everything else. top per capita.
Okay.
The numbers aren't as large here because we're a small population.
That's right, no, that's exactly right. Yeah, I think we're number one or top two of most debt per capita in the country. It's funny, this goes to the conversation we'll be having in a few minutes. We're so hell-bent on being number one on the gun laws while we're number 50 and everything else. We got the worst job, we got, the worst debt structure, we got, so it's.
If you're not talking about the calls, it was called violence, but it was taken on the table, called gun regulation.
Well, the numbers are telling us in some way.
Out from the state because of that.
That could happen. The worst issue would be if some of the manufacturers leave, which may or may not.
Some of your citizens will leave too.
Oh, absolutely. The citizens are. We are the 6th month of the day. The guy who held us off before I did, John Stripp, I don't know, some of you folks probably remember him. He always had the 6 months of the day speech, and it was a great speech because he was a banker and he was a financial planner. And he was, I'm not advising people to do this, but more and more of my clients are leaving the state for 6 months of the day to escape all this stuff, and they go to tax havens, and this becomes their summer home, even though it really isn't. And that's happening. Our population's going down. Our tax revenues are going down. The numbers of our business tax filings are going down. Those aren't direct correlations, but they're telling. If all the numbers are going in one direction, except for tax and spending, to me, that correlation is telling. Is it a direct relationship? No, there's reasons for things, demographic change and whatnot. But the numbers are not going in the right direction. They're just not. They're just not. So, anything else? Let's see. We get on page 9. Yeah, here's one of the proposals in this budget. Again, it's a proposal because we haven't voted on it. It's the governor proposal we adopted. Was to exempt from property taxes vehicles under the $20,000. That would hit Easton for about $2 million, Reading for about $2 million, and Weston for about $2 million. Now, generally, at least from my point of view, and you're, okay, a tax break, that sounds great. Well, you start drilling down a little bit. Okay, how are you going to replace that revenue to the town? So the state doesn't have an answer for that. That revenue was never getting to the state to begin with. It was sort of, okay, here's all these big problems. Well, look, here's a car tax exemption. So it's sort of like, look over here, and over here. And that's what's going on with this car tax exemption. I don't think it's going to last. I think it's going to go away because, we must have had 35 mayors and first selectmen up in the finance committee screaming and yelling, like, how did you do this? And that's like, it's 10% of some town's budget. You can't pull, $2 million out of a town budget tomorrow, because that's essentially what would happen. They argue that they try and reshift some ECS funding to try and fill in that gap. That doesn't affect our towns at all, because our ECS funding is pretty much, zero, not zero, but low for obvious reasons. So I think
ECS, John?
I'm sorry?
ECS?
Educational cost sharing, yeah. There's a formula, towns will all send money, tax money goes up to Hartford, and then school dollars come back down pursuant to a formula that like 6 people understand because it changes all the time. But it's basically based on number of students, the population obviously, demographics, prosperity of the town, that kind of stuff. And so towns like Easton, Reading, and Weston do not get a lot at all, whereas towns like Bridgeport, it's the big cities get most of that money. So I say that only because this concept of, well, we'll give people a break on their car tax, but not help the towns. Well, what's going to mean is a higher property tax or a higher mill rate. So it's, move it here, move it here.
So John, just to understand that, I think you have a statistic in here that for every dollar we send out, we get 3 cents back from the state. So how does that work with the car tax? If we're paying a car tax, does the town get back dollar for dollar or something less?
That's the funny part. The car tax goes straight to the towns.
Okay.
The car tax never gets routed through the state. The way our state works, and most of the states work, is the town's legal ability to tax its citizens comes from the fiat of the state legislature. Unlike the federal government, which had changed, where it should be bottom up, states up to Fed, people up to Fed. States were formed, our state 300 years ago, top down. Municipalities existed, our land use locally, our tax structure locally, our existence locally exists because of what the legislature has done. It declared towns and whatnot. It governs what towns can tax. So that's kind of how the structure works. So and frankly, your question goes right to my point. You're gonna say, all right, towns, you can no longer tax that. Has $0 go to or from the state for that, and all it does is hurt the towns, because no money's going back to fill out. It's even the towns, much like the businesses, scramble around at the last minute trying to figure out what to do. I think that's actually gonna go away. I actually think that's gonna go away.
Hey, John, that number of dollars, it's $600 to $700 million of revenue from what the estimates were saying. I'm looking at like one of the capital reports there. That's a lot of money to replace. Going to get that from where?
Property.
Property tax?
Right.
So it's going to shift from the auto to the property.
Right. So, if you're going for a dog license, it'll be $400. That's what the money comes from. Well, no, but thankfully it could have been. That was an idea.
Register your clip, it's $2,000.
That was one of the ideas, was trying to, we're gonna register and tax everything known to man.
Well, that's
Whether it's a
another
clip, whether it's a dog, whatever.
Register all your clips.
Tax the right one.
That is true.
That's unless you're a renter, then you don't get a direct tax. I mean, it depends.
I haven't seen it.
I'm sorry?
Pardon?
Did you guys have been here your last part? You say
I said, they get the benefit.
renters get the
Some of
benefit.
it is filtered through the rent, but that's probably the only direct tax the renter
Yeah.
pays.
Right. And that's, you know, that discussion came up with Ben Barnes, who's the OPM secretary, and when I sit on the finance committee, also environment and judiciary, saying the same thing about the renters. And I said, well, it's really not true because of the reason you're saying. Arguably, if the landlord's tax rate goes up, it's gonna get netted out in the lease, so you still have to pay to live, so they're gonna get captured there. Maybe in the long run, maybe in a fluid, balanced economic model. But in today's hard dollars, you're dead. You're dead. It'll impact all much more. And it's really, to me, it's really more of a shell game, sort of a look over here thing, as opposed to some kind of fiscal solution. And that's the funny part, because everyone's scratching their heads like, well, okay, why are we doing that? And no one's come up with a good answer from it. Last slide, I think it is, 12 or 13. Yeah, number 12 is, you know, sort of the doom and gloom part. You know, where we are in a bunch of national charts. You know, last slide, you know, it's funny, every year, for the last few years, the governor has made some suggestions about consolidating agencies, and he has, which was a good thing, but unfortunately didn't lay off anybody. I mean, you can say, I'll take 2 agencies and 7 people go out the door because they retired. That really isn't a consolidation. Yeah, so when you hear we consolidate agencies from 27 to 21, how many folks are still working? Well, just about the same. Some folks did retire after the last budget because it was more lucrative for them to jump ship under the old package than the new package, so they took an early retirement, which they're entitled to. That's the deal. You make that deal, you live with that deal. So we got a lot of work to do in the budget. You know, now, we haven't quite focused enough, haven't been able to focus a whole lot on the budget because of the next topic, big topic of the evening, obviously, is what happened in Newtown and what the legislature is doing in response.
If you could address how the proposals are actually going to reduce violence.
Well,
Because it seems like the issue is more around socioeconomic.
let's do this. I'll give the high altitude. This is what we have been doing. This is what the next plan. This is what the plan is, and then I'll do my best to answer specific questions. Right after the events, there was a couple of task force created. One by the governor, which kind of has gone off in its own direction, but the bigger one by the legislature, bipartisan, equal numbers of different people, held hours and hours and hours and hours of public hearings all around the state on 3 main issues: gun control, school safety, and mental health reform. Those are the 3 main areas of discussion. You wouldn't know about you'd almost think the last 2 kind of fell off the radar screen until you hear about the gun control, but the other 2 have been major components of the whole thing because they had to be, frankly. So after public hearings, both at Hartford, away from Hartford, in some committee, some of the bills, some of the concepts we're getting routed through the bills anyway, so there are hours and hours of public hearing for public safety and general law and whatnot. What has happened over the last 5-6 weeks is that the leadership from each caucus, Democrat, Republican, and the Speaker of the House, and, you know, basically, it really comes down to about, you know, 10 folks, and McKinney being one of them, so when he gets here, he, you know, he can fill you in probably. They say, all right, what do we agree on? And on, you know, on most of the issues, there was a fair amount of overlap. You know, the school safety stuff, most of that's gonna get pushed down or get resolved at the local level. We're gonna decide whether we want an SRO. We're gonna decide, you know, whether you want cops in schools. But you know, some of the funding mechanisms that are available for school infrastructure from the state can actually get used now. Before they had to be for educational purposes. Well, you loosen up that language and say, well, you could also do it for foolproof glass if you wanted, or more cameras, or whatever the localities want. New regulations or requirements for new school construction, you know, panic buttons and whatnot. You know, it's some common sense reforms. With the mental health side of the equation, which frankly in my mind is the most significant part of the free place.
I agree with that.
Yeah, because if it depends on our goals. If our goals for better than Newtown, the mental health is the #1 most important thing. It's funny, we had this slide here, but we didn't get it because the bills would shift. We're basically going to establish a first-wide mental first aid paradigm where teachers and all schools are going to get taught mental first aid to be able to identify and help kids who may have a problem, may need some help. That's going to take some training. A lot of people are a little worried about that because they say, whoa, wait a second, you're going to start pointing at little Johnny or little Susie. You know, it's going to have to get done in a delicate manner. There's a method to do that in place already. And we're following a couple of the models, some in Massachusetts and some other places. That's going to get put in place. On top of that, there's going to be, assuming the bill gets crafted the way, you know, as of a day ago, a new tracking system for people who aren't committed but who are, you know, have had mental issues. So the probate courts are now going to have the ability, this is the Massachusetts model, to kind of track people's priors, make sure they get them where they get them. If they need help, get them help, make the phone call, sort of help people guide through the system. There's going to be some more cross-checking with background checks for firearms with some of these mental health records, which theoretically was happening, but apparently hasn't been.